Hello guys, in this tutorial we are going to build a multi-step form using React. This multi-step form allows us to save our data using React Context API. If that project sounds interesting to you, let's get started. At this point, we have only scaffolded our React application using Create React App, and I've installed Tailwind CSS to handle our style components. If you need help getting to this point, just click on the link in the video or see the link below for help. Now let's go ahead and open up our app component. And in our app components, we will be setting up our stepper here. This will take care of our progress. And here we will set up our navigation controls to go back and forth. First, let's go ahead and create a components folder where all our React components will be placed. Then we create a stepper.jsx file, and here we put our stepper component. Next, we go ahead and create our stepper control.jsx file, and in there we add our stepper component, our stepper control component. Let's go to our application, and let's go ahead and include our stepper component within our main application, which is app.js. So we add stepper, and here we go ahead and we add the stepper control. Now let's go ahead and style our app component using our Tailwind CSS classes. Here we want our component to be half the size of the page when we are on medium screens. We want it centered, and we also want a shadow of XL and a rounded border with a white background. Next, we can go ahead and create a wrapper for our stepper component. So we add the Tailwind CSS class container horizontal with a margin top of 5, which is equivalent to 20 pixels. So let's go ahead and wrap our stepper component. Okay, let's go ahead and open up our stepper control. We can go ahead and style our stepper control component with a CSS class of container, making it a flex container and justifying it around, giving it also a margin top of 4 at the margin bottom of 8. Within our stepper control, we can go ahead and create placeholders for back button and also for next button. So let's create our first button. So this button will be our back button, and we're going to use again Tailwind CSS classes to style our button. So give it a background color of white with a text color of slate 400, which is a light gray. We'll make the text uppercase. We give it a padding Y of 2, a padding X of 4, and rounded corners, XL, and we're making the font semi-bold, and we're setting the cursor to pointer. We also setting the border to 2, and the border color would be slit, but on a hover we will have a darker background color. Also on that hover state, the text color will turn white, and we're setting up our transition, which will have a duration of 200 milliseconds, and it'll be easing in out. Now let's go ahead and set our button text to back, and we can pretty much go ahead and copy that entire button and paste it to use as our next button. And we'll just do slight changes. We'll just remove the background color, and we put a background color of green, and our text color would be white. We can also go ahead and remove our border. And let's take a look and see how it looks in our browser. It looks good. Alright, now let us just go to our index.css and add in a custom background color. So I'll put a custom background color of F1, F5, F9. So that'll give us a slight shade of greenish. Let's go back to our app components. So next thing we want to do, we want to go ahead and style our stepper component now. And we'll start to style our wrapper for our stepper component by adding Tailwind CSS class MX4, which gives us a margin of 4 on the x-axis, a padding of 4. We're going to make it a flex container. Justify between, and our items will be centered. Here we'll display our steps in our stepper component. At this point, we can now go ahead and remove our text. Next, we are going to put some placeholders in our component. So here we'll display the numbers. Here we'll also display description, and here we'll display the line connecting the numbers. Okay, let's go ahead and add a few more divs around our display and around our description. And it should look something like this right here. So here we have a div surrounding our display number and also description, and then we have one for our line. Right, so let's go ahead and style our div, making it relative and giving it making it flex column. Center the items, and we're going to give it a text of teal. Now for our display numbers, we'll give it a rounded full. We'll also add a transition, and that will be for 500 milliseconds, and it'll be a ease in out. We're also giving it a border, and the border will be gray. and we're actually making it a height of 12 by a width of 12 also. Right? We're also making that a flex container and centering the items. And we can go ahead and justify it center. Right? And then we give it a padding Y of 3. Now for our display descriptions, we'll give it the absolute position. We'll make it top 0, and the text will be centered, the margin top of 16 and the width of 32. Our text will be extra small and our font would be medium, and the case would be upper, so we'll have uppercase. Then let's put a text here, description. So that's a placeholder basically for our description. And let's go ahead and style our line. So that line would be the line connecting the different steps. We're actually making the line a flex container, and we're giving it a border top of 2, and we're creating a transition 500 milliseconds is in and out, and that's what we should look like. We have our first step and our buttons. Next, let's go ahead and remove everything inside our wrapper, and we're actually going to cut it so we can paste it over again. So we're going to create a constant, and we are now going to assign the code that we just cut to that constant, which is display step. So we go ahead and open a div tag and paste the content within it. And let's go ahead and style that wrapper, and we can give it a width of full, make it a flex container, and set the items to be centered. And if we check in our browser, we have the same display as previously, right? So that means everything is good. So we'll go back to our app.js, and within our app.js, we'll go ahead and create an array, and that array we'll name it steps, and within that array we will have the different steps in our stepper. Right, so we'll have the account information, which is our first step. So this will basically display out as a description in our stepper. So we have account information, we have personal details, and then we have a third step, which is complete. So this will be the description in our stepper. So it will be 1, 2, 3 accounts information, personal details, and complete will be step number 3. Now let's go ahead and create a function. So we use arrow function, and we'll call it display step. And this will be used for determining which component to show depending on the step that we are on. So we have a switch statement, and the switch statement will accept the step, which is the step number, And for the first case, if it's number 1, then we will display the account component. So before I go ahead and complete this function, let's go ahead and create a folder in our components named steps, and within that folder we can go ahead and put our different components for each of the steps. So the first component would be account. And let's put for a placeholder, let's put the name account for a placeholder. We also want to create the second step, and the second step will be details. And we can go ahead and put a text of detail. And let's go ahead and create our last one, which should be final. Let's go ahead and create our component final, and display final as the text here. Alright, so that looks good. We're going to put one more, and we're going to limit payment. Now we're not going to use it right now, but later on we're going to use it to show that that you can actually, it's very flexible and you can add more steps to it if you desire. So let's go back to our app component. And let's go ahead and import the components that we have just created. So we now included all our components, and let's continue with our switch statement. So for case number 2, we add details, and case number 3, we have our final component. So based on this step, the different components will be loaded. I have intentionally left out payment, as payment we will be using it later on during the development to show how new steps can be added easily into our stepper. Now let's go ahead and create a state, and because we are using functional component, we use state. So we'll create our state. Our state would be current step. We'll go ahead and import useState from React. So we have current step and we have set current step, which will be used to set our current step. So here in our stepper component, we'll go ahead and pass our array of steps and the current step that we're on. Let's go ahead and open up our stepper component. And within our stepper component, we can go ahead and destructure our props. And now we can have here steps and current step. Let us go ahead and select our display steps and let us put it within our component. So let's go ahead and cut it and paste it right there. And let's just check to make sure that it did not affect our display component. So here we'll import use effect, use state, and use ref, as we will use them in our component. So let's create a side effect using use effect, and we'll go ahead and check for any changes in steps and in the current step. So whenever steps and the current step changes, our use effect will run. So here's what will happen when our use effect is run. We'll go ahead and iterate through our steps array using our map function, and we will create an object for each of the elements in our array. For each of the objects in our array, a description will be set, and we'll also have values for complete, for highlighted, and for selected. Now if the index is equal to 0, highlighted will be equal to true, and the same will be for selected. Selected will be also equal to true if index is equal to 0. Now we can create a new state, and we can name it new step, and create the function setStep that would be used to update the new state value. Next, we can go ahead and use our useRef and assign it to stepRef. Here we are assigning our step state to our stateRef.current. Here we have a function named updateStep, and that function takes two parameters, the current step minus 1, and it also takes the stepRef.current. Now that function returns current, and we have not defined our function as yet, but we will define it shortly. And here we'll just set up our function definition and pass in our parameters, step number and steps. So here in our use effect, we'll go ahead and set new step using the set new step function, passing in current. So we're now going to take a look back at display steps, and now what we're going to do, we're going to iterate over new steps to create our stepper. So that will be our step number 1, 2, 3, 4 that we have at the top. So let's go ahead and cut this piece of code for displaying our step, and we can return it within our map function for each step. we can go ahead and add in our key and assign index to our key. Here, we will check whether the index passed to the function is the same as the value of new step.length. And if the value is true, using our ternary operator, we will be passing the full width. Now we can get back to our update step function. Within our function, we pass in the steps into a new step constant, and then we initialize the count as 0, and then we use a while loop, right? And while the count is less than the new step length, we go ahead and loop, right? And first we check for the current step, then we check for whether the step is complete, then we check to see if the step is still pending, right? So if the count is equal to the step number, then it means that the step is our current step. So we set the highlighted to true, selected to true, and complete to also true, and we increment count by 1. Right? Now, if the count is less than the step number, it means that our step is complete. So we set highlight to false, selected to true, and complete to true. Now, if none of this case is, then it means that our step is still pending. So in that case, we set all our values to false, which is highlight, select, and complete to false. Next, we will return our new steps object, which will contain each of our steps with the properties of highlighted, selected, completed, and their values attached to it. Now if we go ahead and save and check our component in our browser, we'll see that we have 1, 2, and 3. However, we would need to update our description and update also our step. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we can go ahead and remove 1 here. So let's go ahead and convert our string here into a template literal. Here, we check to see whether the current step is selected, and if the current step is selected, we make changes to our CSS using the Tailwind classes. And here, we check to see if the current step is completed, and if the current step is completed, we put a check, or else we print the number of that step. And if we go ahead and open up our browser, we can see that our first step is selected, and step number 2 and 3 displays the number. Now, in order to display our description on each step, we can go ahead and change our string into a template literal, and we can set up a condition. If the step is highlighted, then we change the text color from a light gray to a dark gray. Then we actually display our description. And here we can pass a condition that checks whether our step is complete. And if our step is complete, we set the color of our line to be green. Alright, so let's go ahead and create our handle click function. And that function will take in a direction as a parameter. So in that case, if we pass in next as the parameter, we can go ahead and use that to determine which button is clicked. So let's just go back to our app component, and within our stepper component, we can go ahead and pass the handle click to the component. Also, we can pass the current step and the steps array to the stepper control. Now within the actual stepper component, we can go ahead and destructure our props and pass the handle click, the current step, and the steps array to our component. Next, we add the onClick event to our buttons, passing in the handle click. Not forgetting to pass next within our handle click function for our next button. Now on our previous button, we can set a condition so that if the current step is equal to 1, then we basically set the opacity to 50% and we change the cursor to not allow. So in other words, we can't go back. Next, on our next button, we go ahead and set a condition. We check for the current step, and if the current step is equal to the length of steps array -1, then we set the value to confirm, or else we set it to next. Now within our handle click function, we check for the direction passed. If the direction passed is equal to next, then we increment the step by 1, or else we decrement the step by 1 also. Here we are basically checking if our new step is more than 0 and less than or equal to the length of the step array. If that is the case, then we set our current step to the new step value. And if you check with our component, you can see when we're on the first step, our back button is grayed out, means that we shouldn't be able to go back. Likewise, when we reach the last step, our next button changes to confirm. Now we will use the React Context API to store our values of our different step components. Using React Context is pretty simple. We'll go ahead and create our context folder, and within our context folder we'll create stepper context.js. And within our file, we'll go ahead and import create context from React. Next, we will go ahead and assign our create context, passing a null value to our stepper context, and export our stepper context. So here within our app component, we'll go ahead and display our actual component for each of the steps. So let's go ahead and import our stepper context. And here just below our stepper component, we'll go ahead and create a div and add our stepper context provider. Now within our provider, we can go ahead and call the function display step, passing in the current step. Next, we'll go ahead and create our states using useState. Our first state will be user data, and next we'll have final data, which will hold an empty array. And within our provider, we can go ahead and pass in those as values. So we pass in user data and set user data function. We also pass in final data and the set final data function to our provider. And even as we view our components in the browser, we can see we can go from one component to the next component by clicking next. And the following steps should be repeated throughout all the components within our steps. So within the account, within the details, and within the final component, we go ahead and we import use context. Then we go ahead and import our stepper context. And then we go ahead and use our use context. We use the user data and the set user data, which we passed early on, into our provider. We can now use those within our function. Next, we create a handle change function and pass in the event as our parameter. Now within that function, we go ahead and destructure the event on the targeted element. And next, we go ahead and use our spread operator to spread our user data object and add a name and a value to our user data. Next, we paste in the body of our component in our return. So that we work a little faster, I'm just going to paste in the content of our account component. So basically for each of our elements, we will go ahead and change the value. So in this case, we have the username value. So if the username value is stored in the user data, we will display it, or else we'll display blank. And then on change, we'll go ahead and call the change function. We do the same thing for password. We change the value to user data and we put password, right? We also change the name of the element as password and the type as password, and then we also change the placeholder, right? So we do that for each one of the elements in our form. So as you can see here, we can go ahead and add in our username and put in our password, and we can go next, and we can actually navigate back and still have our data available in our form, right? We can go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of our components. Let's go ahead and do the same thing here. Our final component is a bit special. So we have a SVG file and we have a little bit of styling, so we just pause the screen and take a look at it. Again, within the details component, we're basically doing the same thing that we did within the accounts component. So feel free to change the field names and the amount of fields in those components. And lastly, to get rid of that issue that we see where we click confirm and we see next button, we just go back in our app component and we can go ahead and wrap our stepper control with a condition that checks if our current step value is the same as the length of the array of steps. So it means that we have reached the last step, and if that is the case, it basically hides our button. And as you can see, our component works perfectly fine. Alright, so now we can go ahead and try and add in our payment component. So within our display steps, we can go ahead and add in that new step with our payment. So let's do some reassigning. Let's go ahead and assign it as number 3 as our third step. So we pass in payment as our third step. Let's go ahead and look at our payment component. So okay, we already have a payment component. Now within our app component, we can include that step in our steps array. And let's go ahead and visit our browser and see our extra step that was added. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to add extra steps to our slider. And this takes us to the end of this tutorial. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to see more videos like this. I am saying bye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.